Then we start with lesson 2, Satya, the third Yama, which is, Asteya, non-stealing, the third Yama. Satya is last week's subject of truthfulness, non-stealing. Asteya means to refuse to participate in acts of theft. Now, physical theft is easy to understand. If you go to the supermarket and you take an apple and you walk out of the shop without paying, everybody understands that that is theft. It's the same as with violence and truthfulness. The obvious part is not so interesting to talk about. What is interesting is the subtle aspects of theft. And there has to be some clarification and nuance, because we live in the world of intellectual property. Everybody makes money out of it and what have you. Now, when I started practicing yoga and learned about all these things, internet didn't exist. The world was a lot simpler than it is now. But first and foremost, theft, just like with lying, causes a nasty feeling. People who steal themselves are never at ease. But when you are stolen, when you are being robbed also, it causes great disruption. Now, the yamas exist to help us achieve peace, harmony, sattva in our daily lives, so that we can be more focused on what life is really about. And to do so, we need to stop certain kinds of instinctive behaviors that lead to disruption, that lead to us losing our peace of mind. Stealing, like lying and violence, is behavior that is caused by the situations that we find ourselves in. A child that is neglected at home and doesn't get proper meals on a regular basis and treats, snacks and what have you, will start to steal out of need. And there exists, what happens then is that there is a vicious cycle comes into play. The child maybe gets caught, has to go to the police station, gets punished, and things can actually escalate and get worse and worse from there on forward. A child, of course, needs adults to provide a stable environment in which they don't need to be violent, lie, or steal. But as adults, we have our own responsibility, and regardless of the circumstances we find ourselves in, we need to cut out these kind of instinctive behaviors. That is why yoga is the science of control, science of the control of life. It is natural that when you are in need, that you try to find a shortcut to get what you need, what you want, even if that means theft. We violate the yamas because it is the easy way, the direct way to fulfill our needs, whether that is aggression, to deal with a situation we find ourselves in with nasty people, whether that is lying to avoid an inconvenience, or whether that is stealing to fulfill a desire or a need. It's always a shortcut. But taking the shortcut will solve a problem in the short term, but it creates a problem in the long term. It leads to disruption. We lose our peace of mind. and become distracted. Which also means then we cannot focus on the things that really matter in life. Relationships and career, study, what have you. Or just being ourselves and being at peace with ourselves. So the ancient yogis recognized that yes, it is human and it is natural and normal that you react in certain ways, but because of the big disruption that it causes in the long term, it's wise to try to contain this instinctive behavior. Now, stealing an object without, taking an object without agreement of the owner is theft. Everybody understands that. But if you look at intellectual property, like I said before when I started practicing yoga, internet didn't exist yet, but when I experienced yoga for the very first time, I became so enthusiastic about it. The same day, I went to the library and I found a book about yoga. Now, if I write a book, every time somebody buys my book, I receive a commission. Let's say I receive $1 or 1,000 won every time a person buys a book. But now the government establishes libraries in every district where people can get books. Novels for entertainment, but also informative books, scientific books. Now I've written a book that ends up in a library, and every time a person takes my book from the shelf in the library, I don't receive anything. Technically, this is a form of theft. You understand that, right? But there is something to consider here. There is a reason why governments want people to go to libraries to find information. There is an overriding principle because it enriches people's lives to have access to information. Now, libraries still exist maybe, but they're not so important anymore. Here, everything is in your phone. Google is your library now, and even much better. You don't even have to search anymore. You just type it in and you find so much information about whatever it is that you want to know. So that is something to consider there. Technically it's theft, but it has so many positive benefits for mankind that we must make a compromise here. Now, there is another phenomenon. Before the internet, when I would go to a concert of my favorite band, it would just cost $25 for a ticket, right? And when you wanted music, there was no internet, there was no YouTube, so you had to go to a record shop and buy a record. And the artist would receive a commission from every record that was sold. So then came the internet and YouTube, and artists started to complain that people are stealing their intellectual property, copying, and prices of concerts went up. Instead of $25, you now pay $250 or more for a ticket to a concert. But there is something to consider here too. The world has completely changed. It is technically theft if you watch a video on YouTube and you don't pay for it. I think these days YouTube does, artists who have many followers and many views, they do make money from their channel. So in that sense, it is like the commission that they would get from a record that they sell. But things have changed because people don't buy records anymore. They make a little bit more money because the concerts are more expensive, but there's something else. Do you remember the success of Psy? Gangnam Style? That was the most watched video on YouTube. Billions of times. It has been viewed billions of times. He never complained about theft of intellectual property. And he didn't need to. The world has changed. Instead of selling records, big companies, knowing that you are so famous and that the whole world is watching you, big companies then come to you and give you money to promote their product. When Psy was in the beginning stage of his fame with Gangnam Style, you saw him everywhere. He promoted Hype Beer, he promoted everything. On the billboards, on the buses, on the subway, he was everywhere. He made a lot of money from that. He didn't sell records. People were watching his Gangnam Style billions of times without paying him much money, but he made money in other ways. So, you know, theft, yes, but there are forms of theft that we technically should avoid, and yet, if you look at the dynamics, it's kind of acceptable. So that part is good to consider how this works. There are some more serious things to consider here because we all commit theft in many ways, even theft to ourselves. We are subjected to a 5-day work week, sometimes 6 days, working 10 hours a day, sometimes more. If you're lucky, 8-9 hours a day, 5 hours a day, and everybody is complaining. This is too much. I can't handle. I'm exhausted. I want to take a break. I want to have a vacation. Which means it tells us this is not natural. The natural rhythm of a human being is not in line with what companies and the government expect from us. So we burn out. What is happening from the perspective of yoga is we are committing theft on ourselves because we are demanding more from ourselves than we can realistically handle. That's a form of theft committed onto ourselves. We do this with other people too. If you are a parent, you have a child, you demand from your child all kinds of things. And it is of course important, children need to grow and learn and develop, but because of our ambition, because of the parents' ambition, we often push the children too far. We do this also with our pets. We want our dog to sit and give paws and do tricks. That's a form of theft. A dog or a cat, they just want to be a dog or a cat. They don't want to do all kinds of tricks. I would tell you an anecdote of a situation that I had when I had my studio in River Tower here in Yoido. One morning, a dad came with his daughter. I think at that time she was 11 years old, and he told me that his daughter was a skister, and that she was going to be kukkatepyo. He was preparing her to be a professional skister. To perform at the highest level, go to the Olympics and World Championships and what have you. So he said she needs yoga. And he left her with me. He didn't stay and do yoga with her. He left her with me, and he forced her to do yoga. So, if you understand that everything is energy, you see a very interesting picture. Her name was Yubin, poor Yubin. She must be early 20s now. I'm really curious how she's doing. But she was like, no, very sad. Very miserable. You feel my energy? With a forward bend. So, in the first time that she came, I tried to stimulate her a little bit. I didn't fully understand the picture yet. So, while the other members would do their posture, I would go to Yubin and try to correct her and tell her a little bit about the alignment and so on. And I noticed that she just really didn't want to be there. She hated it. But her dad forced her to come, so she came every morning. So at some point I told you, I just let her go. I felt that every time I talk to her, she feels bad because she thinks that she must do things that she doesn't want to do. So I just let her go. At some point I even told her, hey, Yubin, if you don't want to do it, don't do it. Just sit down or lie down and just relax. This is an extreme form of theft performed. The father, later I found out that the father was a physical education teacher. And I also found out that Yubin had a younger sister, so she was the oldest child, which made me realize that dad regretted not having a son. So he tried to turn his daughter into a son. And he projected his ambitions onto her. And he destroyed her with that. What happened one day is that after the class and doing a little bit of administration, I went home. I lived across the road, so I walked out the front door and I crossed the road and I saw Yubin, who had taken a shower and also left the gym, and she went to school. And she was totally different. She was crossing the road, hopscotching. So happy with her backpack, going to school. That's what made her happy. It's energy. And this is about the chakras. This is about being forced to do things that you hate. All your energy drops down. Doing things that you love to do brings all your energy up. That is where enthusiasm comes from. Joy. She was full of joy going to school. After the torture of the gym that she hated, she was going to school. Another thing that also happened that made me understand the synergy between her and her dad, and the fact that he regretted not having a son, is when on a Saturday she came with her younger sister. Her younger sister was constantly joking and giggling and fooling around. Totally the opposite of Yubin, who was dark and depressed. Meaning that Yubin got all the pressure from her dad, but the younger daughter, no pressure at all. She could just do what she wanted and be who she wanted to be. And that is when I realized the tragedy that was unfolding there, especially for Yubin. So this tells you something. This is about non-stealing. There was a very tragic form of theft. And I'm not blaming the father, not in a sense that he's a bad guy. He was there's just subconscious functioning that's just what he thought he wanted from his. Later he will regret. Later he will realize the damage that he has done to his daughter. Very sad for Yubin. It's not about judgment here, but what I want you to understand is how energy works, how it can destroy people, but also how it can uplift people, and that putting excessive demand on people is a form of theft. What I hope by explaining all this in so much detail is that you start to see in your own life how you feel when you are engaged in things that you like, and how you feel when you are engaged in things that you must do because other people demand them from you. Now, as an adult, there is something else. There are always things that we don't like. And it is from the light of yoga, it is important that we stop doing things that we don't like. Except we have duties and responsibilities. I have 2 dogs. They need to go out. Sometimes I grumble and I think, I have to go out again. I don't want to go out. But I go out 365 days a year, 3 times a day. Also when it rains, also when it's hot, when it's cold, snow, because they need to go out to do their business. They don't do their business at home. They don't pee and poo at home. They need to go out. That's a duty, a responsibility. If I don't like it, I shouldn't take dogs. Well, later I will explain how those dogs came into my life, because that's a very interesting story too. They were on TV, Dongmul Nongjang, a couple of years ago. I will explain about that later on. They're wonderful. They gave me purpose again, and in return, I take care of them until they die, 15 years at least. Yeah? We will come back to that later. Duties and responsibility, that is when you have a child, or you have a partner, or at work. You may not always like what you have to do, but if it is part of a commitment that you made, it is just something that you need to do. The good thing about this is that it makes you grow, it makes you mature, it makes you wiser. While ignoring responsibilities and duties leads to damage. If I don't walk my dogs on a regular basis, they will suffer, and maybe their behavior will change. And that is the same with children, and that is the same with your partner. So everything, especially when you're a yogi, everything around you becomes more harmonious and happier. But if you are not living up to your responsibilities and your duties, it will turn around. So demand, excessive demand on yourself or other people is theft. But there are circumstances where you have a duty or a responsibility, then it's not theft. It is the result of a choice that you made in your life. A choice to have a dog, or a choice to have a child, or a choice to be in a relationship with somebody. Care for your parents maybe when they get old. These are just things that we need to do in life. That is stimulating your heart. You understand that? If you give in to the resistance, your energy drops. If, however, you perform your duty, your responsibility, you open your heart. So you may not really like it, but if you do it anyway, you benefit greatly from it. So there are always other sides to this story. Technically it's theft, but you benefit from it in this way, in an innocent way. I mentioned in the handout the ritual of prayer. When I was a child, in the beginning, my parents used to pray before starting dinner. They quickly stopped doing that because we were a family of 7 children, and we were always fooling around and disturbing the prayer and not taking it serious. So my mom quickly stopped with that practical as she has always been. But many people do not really understand what prayer is about. Natural prayer simply is a result of being connected. Yeah? When I have dinner tonight, prayer means to understand where my food comes from. Not from the supermarket. I'm not talking about the supermarket, that's too easy. If I eat meat, I commit violence. That is why most yogis try to be vegetarian. But if I eat meat, my dogs eat meat, at least I realize that there is an animal that sacrificed their life to feed me or my dogs. When there are vegetables on my plate, potatoes or rice, then I realize it grew in a field, powered by the sun, with the hard work of a farmer, who then harvested it and brought it to the wholesaler. The wholesaler brought it to the supermarket, and I bought it at the supermarket. I realized where it comes from. Nature puts all the energy, the farmer puts in all the work to allow me to live, to be healthy. That is what prayer is about. We now live in a world that we don't have to do effort. If you have some money in your pocket, you can have food 24 hours a day. But 100 years ago, 50 years, 70 years ago, that didn't exist. There were no supermarkets, and most people didn't even have money. So try to understand when food is very difficult to get. Sometimes the harvest fails, or you have no money to get any food and nobody wants to give you any. You're going hungry. Your children go hungry. So when you have some food, you're very grateful. Oh my goodness, finally, I have something to eat. It's gratitude. Prayer is about gratitude. That you understand that you cannot take anything for granted. If the farmer doesn't work, you have no food. If there is a flood or a drought or any tornado or natural disaster that destroys the crop, there is no food. We live in an interconnected world. If we have no food in Korea, then we can get some food from China, Japan, or Europe. But in the past, that was impossible. So that was very important for people. Still, Korean people, when you meet them, they say, 밥 먹었어? Did you eat? Younger generations, they don't care anymore. They won't never ask something like that. Older generations, they had the Korean War and the poverty. 밥 먹었어? 밥 먹었니? Because they knew hunger. They did go to sleep with an empty stomach many times. Also interesting is the older generations, when they visit, they bring a bag of sugar. Don't need sugar anymore. I have a lot of sugar in my cabinet. But for them it's very valuable. It's like a treasure. Because they grew up in a time there was no sugar. Sugar was an incredible luxury, like gold. You understand that? It's interesting, huh? Anyway. While observing Asteya, non-stealing, we should, however, not overlook the fact that we must also be tactful and prudent. I kind of alluded to this last week, and I promised you that I will explain a little bit more. It is about withholding the truth from people is not only lying, a form of lying, it's also theft. People, if there is certain information, people have a right to know. Remember when the coronavirus, in the beginning of the coronavirus, many governments denied it. They don't want to disturb society. They denied it. As a result, it became worse. That's a lie. And it is theft. The population had a right to know. Now, in the very beginning that I started teaching in a structural way with handouts, with the text and following the framework, I had a male student who, when we talked about non-lying and non-stealing, he became a little bit indignified, a little bit angry. He said, I have a colleague at work. He's having affairs with 3 married women. And he was upset about that. He said, based on what we are learning about truthfulness and non-stealing, I must tell their families what their mom or what their wife is doing. Then I told him, Greg, his name is Greg, just for a moment stand still and think about what you are going to do. He was serious. He thought it was very inappropriate and totally out of order. And I said, Greg, listen, you are right. They are doing wrong, but you have to consider this. If you go to their families, if you go to these women's husbands, and you tell them they are having affairs with this single guy, what do you think is going to happen? You're destroying families if you do this. Do you want to be responsible for destroying 3 families? Maybe they end up divorcing. Maybe the children will become very unhappy. Is that what you want? So be careful what you wish for. You are right. There is something going on that is fishy, that is not proper. But if you step in and reveal this to the people involved, you're violating all the yamas that we have learned until now. You're doing so much damage. So it's always important to put in a little bit of nuance to realize that actions lead to consequences. And if those consequences are unacceptable, you should be very careful what you do. That is why we need to be thoughtful, not act upon an impulse because of anger, because of indignation, because what you're seeing is not correct and it is not right, and that's one thing. But then, in a moment of samadhi, in a moment of reflection, I had an epiphany. And I said, with a smile, I said to Greg, hey Greg, I kind of understand where you're coming from, because I'm a man too. And I said, aren't you a little bit jealous, your colleague, that he has so many girlfriends, even though they are married? Just consider for a moment that that may actually be the reason why you feel indignant. Huh? And just let it go. There are always many things to consider. So, if you start to live up to the principles that we are studying here now, without consideration, you become a fanatic. You become a radical. You become what in the Bible is called a zealot. You do more damage than good. This is not created to make us do damage. This is created to take care of our peace of mind. If we violate these rules because we think it is correct, we actually disturb our own peace of mind and that of many others. So it's easy to talk about these subjects, to lay them out, but in practice it's very dynamic. And there are always many angles to look at the issue that you're dealing with. And that is why it is important that you never act rashly. You take your time. Just think it over a little bit. Sleep on it is a known expression. We say that in the Dutch language and also in English. Just sleep on it. A very important aspect of this, and this is the last element, last aspect. When you lie, when you steal, people lose respect for you. People lose trust in you. Nobody wants to associate with you. Nobody wants to work with you. People will avoid you. To be honest, truthful, to not steal in all its various forms takes effort. It's really not easy to implement this in our lives. Although any yoga practitioner naturally leans more and more towards behavior in line with this, because you become more sensitive. But not easy. However, when you are honest, when you stop stealing from yourself and from others, people feel that. Instinctively or intuitively, people feel that. And what happens is, trust develops. People respect you for your straightness, for your honesty. People appreciate you. But trust is built. As a result, people like you, people want to be with you, and people want to work with you. So, it's not easy to implement this in our lives. We have to do effort, we have to pay attention, but it has huge implications into how we interact with, or how the world interacts with us. You know very well that when people lie, it gives you a very nasty feeling. A bad taste in your mouth. You start to dislike those people. You start to eventually even hate them. The opposite happens when you don't engage in these kind of behaviors. People start to like you, respect you, trust you, and wonderful things come out of that. Questions about the subject? It's been quite a long 1.5 hours. I think we need a little break before we start with asana.